Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Brilliance of Humanity Summit. It has been so amazing to have so many wonderful guests talking to us about the brilliance of humanity. And trust me, today we are going to soar even higher as we have our very special guest, Loree Draude. Loree, welcome to the Brilliance of Humanity Summit.
Thank you so much, Deb. I'm really excited to be here and support this.
Oh my gosh, I've been so excited about talking to you. I just have to tell you that. And we should probably tell people why we really tie you into Soaring with Humanity, because you were actually one of the first female combat pilots for the Navy. Like, this is huge.
Thanks. No, it was an amazing experience. I'm incredibly grateful to have been able to serve our country in that way. And so soaring has always been part of my life in one form or the other. And I've translated that into more of I guess a metaphorical sense for people. And hopefully that will help everyone with soaring in their own lives.
Yeah, well, and I think it will. And we obviously are going to get to that metaphor. But I just feel like we just need to sort of double click on this for a moment. When you actually entered into this profession of being a combat fighter pilot, this is probably a time when we weren't seeing women in this profession. Like, you really went against the grain here.
There were very, very few women flying in the Navy at the time. Women had been flying in the Navy since the early 70s. In fact, this year is the 50th anniversary of women in aviation, in the Navy and in the military. And it's also the 30th anniversary of women in combat aviation in the military. So when I joined in the mid 80s, I started college in the mid 80s. I graduated in 89. I earned my wings in 1992. And at that point, there were very few women flying. The roles were very limited. You could be an instructor pilot and teach other student aviators how to fly an airplane, or you could be a support pilot and train pilots on the missions that they were doing. So that was my first job in the military, was being a support pilot, and I would pretend to be a missile and fly along really fast and help train the pilots know how to shoot down a missile. So I had been flying for about a year before the ban was lifted, and then became part of that first wave of women aviators in combat squadrons.
Oh my gosh. Can you just take us to that moment, like when you found out you could do this? Like, I'm
Yeah.
making it this was a big deal.
It was. I mean, it was a big deal because women had been in roles in the military where they were getting shot at. So, but they weren't allowed officially to shoot back. And so it was a big deal for a lot of reasons, not only because we were able to fully contribute in ways that we had not been able to before, but also it was an acknowledgement of women's abilities and the importance of women in the military. Women had been serving in support roles for quite a while, and without women, we would not have won the first Gulf War. We would not have been successful there because of all the things that women were doing. So it was a natural evolution to have women start performing in combat roles because they really were doing the roles. It just wasn't official. And so when they did lift the ban on women flying in combat, I was already flying an F-18 Hornet, which was a fighter jet. It just was in a support role. There were other women flying high performance aircraft. So it was really a matter of refocusing our training on what kind of missions we'd be flying. So it was a big step, and it wasn't without its challenges and its speed bumps, but here we are 30 years later, and it's no big deal. In fact, that's actually, I wrote a book about my first deployment on the aircraft carrier, and I purposefully chose the title "She's Just Another Navy Pilot" because that was really our goal, was to be just another Navy pilot, not a woman pilot, but to be, part of a high performing team that was serving our country.
Um, well, and I love that you're naming that. And I'm glad that you're also bringing out that book. And there's also this piece of, like, I remember growing up and thinking about certain professions that I may have wanted to do. And there were just some that at the time, it just wasn't even the realm, right?
Yeah.
And so, what a great role model example. And of course, call sign Rowdy, which I so love. And I'm curious about, how did that experience then actually start bringing you to the work that you're doing today? Because you truly are all about the concept of soar.
Right. So, one of the things that I appreciated the most about my time in the Navy was being part of a high performing team. And, flying jets was super fun. And I loved, flying on the aircraft carrier. But what was most meaningful to me was really the people that I served with, and especially the sailors that I supported as a division officer and as a department head. And so I wanted to be able to support teams. And, after I left the military, I ended up going to business school and then into business, and did various roles in Silicon Valley, working in marketing operation roles at startups as well as larger tech companies. And what I always really enjoyed the most was doing something that mattered with other people who really cared about having impact. And so as I, spent 20 years doing that work, I really appreciated the experience of being able to share some of the things I had learned in the military. And then after I finished working in Silicon Valley and started my own coaching and speaking business, I realized there were a lot of things that I kept saying over and over again to clients or to audiences that I really wanted to be able to capture in a book and hopefully have more impact and share those stories and lessons more widely. And that's what led me to writing my book, Soar into Joy, was really, this desire to share the lessons that I learned in hopes that someone will learn them earlier in their life and, and be able to incorporate them in a way that will help them live a fulfilled life as well.
I love that you're bringing this up about, oh, I wish I learned them sooner. And
Yeah.
it's sort of that juxtaposition of, and yet, how many of these things does it actually take to live a certain amount of life, right? To learn. It's the yes and, isn't it? They both work for us.
Yes. And it's so funny because I'd heard yes, and I'd heard of improv classes, and I was living in New York this past year. And since I was in New York, I thought, well, I should take improv classes. These are going to be the best classes and teachers I could ever take. And sure enough, it was really fun, not only just for, improv training, but really so many good life lessons, about that additive nature of bringing something to either a stage with a few other people doing improv, or bringing something to a team, or even just bringing something to a relationship with somebody else. It's all about how are you showing up and how are you making it better and really bringing your best self forward. So yes, and I learned so much about yes and how it really can show up in our lives in so many different ways, not only on an improv stage.
Isn't life an improv stage in its own way? Isn't life
Yeah.
an improv stage? I think about that a lot.
I
So
love that analogy. It's so true. I mean, it's remarkable how many things in improv are really helpful for life in general. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, and as we have a wonderful mentor that we both worked with, Rick Tamlin, and like he says, it's all made up, and really so much of it is all made up.
That's
So, I mean, there's that too, right? I'm curious about, as you've gone around doing this work around the soaring and this concept and the acronym around SOAR, and speaking about your book, speaking to people, coaching and training, what gets in the way of people soaring?
I would say the number one thing is fear. And so it's really ourselves. We really get in our own way. And it's totally understandable. You think about all the messages that we hear every day, the messages that we grew up hearing. So much of it is, you need to have more, you're not enough. You need to be working harder. You're going to fail if you don't do this. Like there are a lot of really negative, diminishing messages that we hear. And so being able to recognize that, first of all, and tap into that feeling and recognize, hey, fear is really in our head. And granted, there are some really good fears. Like, you don't want to be standing at the edge of a tall building. That's a very healthy fear to have. So there are some some fears that are good for our own physical safety, but that's really where fear comes from is, biologically or genetically, I guess it's kept us alive. It's kept the human species alive for years and years. But it's also held us back from things that aren't going to put us into physical danger, but instead are more uncomfortable or, are unknown. And therefore we shrink back from that and we hold back from doing things that we really want to do, but we convince ourselves that it's not going to happen, or we're not going to be good enough to do it, or, whatever type of, self-deprecating talk that we convince ourselves with. And so fear, one of my favorite acronyms of fear is future events aren't real. So FEAR, future events aren't real. And so when we're thinking, oh, I'd really love to take that class, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to pass, or, I'm not going to have time, or, I'm already projecting failure in the future. And rather than thinking, okay, how can I make this happen? And wow, it's going to be amazing when I finish this, and really flipping that fear on its head and thinking about all the ways that I could be successful doing this. And so I really feel like mindset is so important when we are talking about the things that we want in our lives, because it's very natural for fear to hold us back. It's a protection mechanism to keep us safe, but it also keeps us from doing things that are really meaningful to us, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I'm thinking back to your experience with fighting in combat and with over 300 missions. How did you work through the fear? Like, what did you learn from that? Like, I realized, okay, we're probably not going out and doing combat missions here, but I'm sort of making up in my mind that whether it's that or something else, the way that fear shows up is similar. The thoughts are similar, right? It may not be the same situation, but the behavior or the thought patterns, that's where the consistency is. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think it is. In that when we are worried about our physical safety, we are going to take precautionary measures to make sure we don't put ourselves into a physical situation that might harm us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I was flying and landing on an aircraft carrier, the way that I mitigated that fear was I had great training. The military does amazing training to prepare you for that physical danger of being in an environment that is risky. And so, what I found is that as long as I'd gone through the training, I rehearsed my emergency procedures and I knew them cold. As long as I had that level of preparation, then I felt comfortable being in an environment that was dangerous. But that's, again, a very physical environment. Then I had to be really careful, because what would happen is, I'd be lying in my rack in my bed at night on the ship thinking, okay, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And, after a few really restless nights of, not being able to get to sleep because I was just going over and over these scenarios in my head, I had to realize and recognize that, um, you know, I had that wisdom. If anything like this was going to happen, I would know what to do. And all I was doing is, this doomsday visualizing that wasn't helping me at all. It was just making me anxious about something that hadn't happened yet. So I think that there's, some value to some projection in the future as far as preparation goes. But when it gets to the point where you're constantly losing sleep or stressing out or really getting anxious about it, then it's not helpful. So finding that balance is important.
Oh my gosh, so important. And I love that you're bringing all these things in, because what you're also doing is normalizing our experiences. So, whether the worry is about a test we have to take, or a paper we have to present, or a work project that has a deadline, whatever that is, that spiral concept can be impacting to everyone.
Yeah.
I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about, with your book, Soar into Joy, you talk a lot about SOAR.
Mhm.
And I would love for you to just at least sort of give us a little teaser of what is that about?
Yeah, absolutely. So SOAR is an acronym that just really fit the four main topics that I have found to help me with my own life in living a fulfilled life. And so the S of SOAR stands for self-awareness. And this is really about knowing what matters most to us, as well as knowing what our strengths are. So the things that we really like to do that we're good at, and taking the time to really identify those things for ourselves. Because a lot of times people think that strengths are just things that we're good at. But a lot of times, those things that we're good at aren't necessarily things that we love to do. And so people get themselves stuck in jobs or careers where they're really good at what they do, but they don't love it. So being able to identify what is it that you're good at that you love, and also what matters most to you, what are your values, so that you can make sure you're honoring those in your life. So when I talk about self-awareness, I offer some exercises and some tips on how to identify those for you individually. The O is for openness. And this was, I think, a revelation for me, in that openness actually requires a lot of strength to be able to maybe be wrong about things, because, we humans, we don't like to be wrong. So, humans would rather be right than happy sometimes. And so, being willing to be wrong about something is tough, but it also can open us up to other possibilities that can bring fulfillment and more joy into our lives. So, I talk a little bit about openness and some exercises on how to practice openness. The A is for appreciation. And I love that appreciation and gratitude, I think, are getting a lot more visibility and consideration in our world, because I think when we are, at least when I'm feeling stressed out about the world or worried about anything, I try to come back to a place of gratitude, and I focus on what am I grateful for. Because I think the more you feel that gratitude in your life, the more you will bring things to be grateful for into your life. So, gratitude and appreciation, being able to tap into that and to find those things that we're grateful for in our lives, is something that, has allowed me to soar in life. And then finally, the R is for responsibility.
Mm.
And this one is, as I mentioned in the book, this one sometimes is maybe the most difficult letter of the acronym SOAR, because responsibility is something we typically view as being burdensome or heavy. And responsibility is really about ownership and making choices and owning those choices, and understanding that, victims, playing the victim is a disempowering strategy. And I want to be really clear. Obviously, horrible things happen to people, and I'm not talking about victim blaming. This is really more about taking ownership for how you show up in your life and the choices that you make, and being responsible for that. So I also, for each of these letters in the acronym SOAR, I do share some stories from my experiences in the Navy, as well as my time in Silicon Valley and my coaching practice. And at the end of each chapter is a flight plan for you that has some exercises and some ways for the reader to expand their own self-awareness, to practice openness and appreciation, and also to consider responsibility and what it means for them.
Oh, Loree, I love this work that you're doing in the world. And
Yeah.
I like want to double click on each of those. There's something in here about how do we tie this soar and soaring into humanity? Like
Mm.
there's so many connections that I can just, it's like ding, ding, ding. I feel like the neon signs going off. What, how do you connect the soar concept to humanity? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're all meant to soar. I think I like to say that we all have our pilot's license to soar. We just have to use it.
Mm.
And and so being able to recognize that as humans, as human beings, we have that choice. Most of us on this planet, not everyone, unfortunately, but most of us have the freedom and independence to make choices about how we're living our lives. And so, soaring for humanity, I think, is being able to recognize the fears that we have and work together to mitigate those fears, so that everyone can be pursuing the things that they want in life. And, Deb, you and I are so lucky, and probably a lot of the listeners to this are really lucky to be living in a country where freedom is part of the formation of this country, and being able to preserve that is important. And not every person on this planet enjoys that. So I think for humanity, being able to make those choices is what soaring is for me. And so that's why I want to bring this message out to more people, because I do want to make sure that everyone has that freedom, has that choice on how they want to live their life.
Yeah. It's so true on so many levels, everything you're saying. And, when you were talking about that responsibility piece and about the ownership, I couldn't help but just take a moment to reflect even on my own experiences where I was thinking, where are the places where I'm taking ownership? Where are the places where I maybe need to step it up a bit? And how does that ownership actually impact humanity and impact what's happening out there, right? And I
Yes.
was curious, as you were even putting this together, did you almost notice yourself sort of doing your own little inventory as you like,
Yes.
I'm
Well, I
just
think
kind of curious.
what you're saying is so important, because it's so easy to to either read the news online or sit at home and watch the news on TV. And the news is, unfortunately, the media is incentivized by showing things that are going to get eyeballs, and just the way human nature is, that often tends to be tragedy, misery, just and so I think that responsibility for me is making sure that we are bringing joy into the world, and that we are sharing gratitude, and that we are talking about the brilliance of humanity, because by bringing that energy into the world, we hopefully are bringing energy to this concept that we are all human beings. Yes, we all have differences in how we think that we should live our lives, and hopefully we have the freedom to be able to live our lives the way we want them to. But um the fact that we're all human beings on this planet means that we have to figure out how to live together, and how to avoid wars, how to avoid conflict as much as possible. Um, you know, I joke sometimes that you sometimes wish for an alien invasion, because that's about the only thing that's going to unite humanity. It feels like that sometimes. But um, by by talking about the things that are going well for humanity, and sharing the sharing the good news, and sharing the joy, and highlighting the brilliance of humanity. I think that by doing those things and bringing energy to those positive things, you're making the choice to go down that path of positive, constructive growth versus destructive conflict and violence. So the words that we share, the things that we say, bring things into the world. I mean, every single invention on this planet started as an idea in some human being's head. And so if we can instead, if we can make sure those thoughts are positive and constructive, and supportive of community, then those are the things we're going to bring into this world versus war and conflict and destruction.
I love that you said, we have our own pilot's license. We can be the light. Like you have a license to be the light, right? And
Yes.
I feel like we can't completely overstep the joy doesn't necessarily mean you're at this happy 100% all the time. It's the navigation of it. Can you just speak to that for just a minute? Because I think sometimes people need that distinction between joy and happiness, right? They're two different things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's when I was younger, I used to always be really kind of annoyed by this thought that why can't life be happy all the time? And it seemed kind of crappy, honestly. Like, what kind of world is this? Um, and and then I think somewhere along the line, I realized that you can't fully experience happiness unless you have had heartache along the way. It's that whole contrast, just like with colors, or emotions, like unless you feel kind of the opposite, it's hard to really know truly what something like that feels like. And so being able to appreciate that, it gets back to appreciation. If we can really appreciate those moments of joy when we do feel that feeling of soaring that I talk about in the book, that's what I would love for each of us to tap into when we are struggling or dealing with a challenge. being able to remember that that is still possible. That's always going to be possible. Even if it's not in our life right now, it's out there and we'll get back to it.
I like to talk a lot too about the fact that it's almost like it can be an EKG machine sometimes. Like we can experience joy even in the lows, right?
Yeah.
There's this experience of it's sort of like it's a mindset. You talked earlier about the mindset. And I know that sometimes people will say to me, my gosh, you're always so filled with joy. And for me, there's sort of that. I just always know that there's a hope, that there's love, that no matter what's going on, it really speaks to that gratitude place that you're talking about. There's something about that, and I'm not sure it's right. There's like a lot in that.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, like I'm not always like this all the time, right? Like there's things in life that aren't great. And there are certainly times when I'm not feeling happy or even joyous. And I think what I appreciate now, though, is that I recognize it. And when that is happening, when I am feeling down or mad, or afraid, I'm quicker to recognize that negative emotion, and I'm able to normally, get out of that much more quickly than I did in the past. I didn't marinate in it like I used to. And I think because it gets back to that, that choice and deciding how long do I want to feel this negative emotion. Sometimes I do want to sit in it a little bit. I do want to be mad at somebody for a little bit, but not for long. It isn't helpful. It's not constructive. And so, that helps me move through it. I won't, and hopefully past it. But yeah, I think again, like self-awareness and just being really in touch with our emotions and being able to notice these things, that is such a huge step. And it doesn't mean that you have to like immediately go from being really mad at someone to, wanting to hug them and love on them. But it's just noticing it, I think, is such a big improvement and first step towards getting to a better place.
Absolutely. And I'm actually glad that you named that because one thing I really like to talk to people about, it's not necessarily about making an emotion good or bad. It's about presencing what's showing up
Mhm.
and then working through that. And let's explore like what's here. Like, and I truly believe there's a gift in everything. When we're mad, there's a gift in that because there's a new awareness, right? That self-awareness piece that you talk about in your soar. And I love that you bring that up because we can give ourselves permission to be mad for a moment. And also with that self-awareness comes, oh, what do I need to be open to in this moment? Right. Like kind of
Right.
going through your methodology.
Right. And it also teaches us, what really matters to us. If we get really mad about something and we recognize that we're really mad about this, then we can ask ourselves, what is it about this that is making me so mad? And a lot of times, for me at least, it's like, oh, this is something I really care about. This is something that matters a lot to me. And I think those are good things to know about ourselves.
Loree, I love that you just brought that up because what this just inspired in me, I know we just have a couple minutes left here, but I think, and I'm voting that this is part of the reason people are getting so mad right now in our world, because humanity is not at a peace point. It's not at a love point. It's at a people are getting mad. They want to do something. That's why I started the summit because I was getting frustrated and I thought I want to be a part of the solution. I want to start getting some brilliance of humanity out there. So that anger actually propelled this summit.
That's awesome. I love that, Deb. I am also a woman of action, and so I really appreciate what you're doing because when there's a problem, I'm not the person who's going to sit there and complain about it. I'm the person who, like you, wants to find a way to solve that problem.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your SOAR acronym. It can be used on so many levels, so many levels. So, Loree, I know you put together a little freebie for everyone. Do you want to tell everyone about it?
Sure. I'm offering the first chapter to my book, Soar into Joy, as a complimentary takeaway from your time. And I really am grateful for your time for watching this and for listening to the other speakers as well for the brilliance of humanity. And I'm hoping that the first chapter will give you a peek inside some of the things that Deb and I have talked about today, and we'll give you an idea of some of the other things that are in my book around the SOAR acronym. But that's an opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about soaring, and I hope it will enable you to soar.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Loree. Obviously, friends, details will be coming to you in your follow-up email that you'll be getting, and be sure and check it out. I mean, you've gotten just a little taste of Loree. You will get even more of a taste when you get into that book. Loree, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. This has been like, it's warmed my heart. I don't know. It's like it's touched my heart. It's warmed my heart. It gives me more hope. And quite frankly, I feel like I kind of want to soar a little. Like I do. I actually feel like even just saying that word, I've noticed several times I'm doing this, which is like, well, that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
The coach in us is going, well, that's interesting. So I just can't thank you enough. Please keep bringing your incredible work to the world. We need you. We need more of it. We need more of your books. I love the Soar into Joy. I just love that concept. And thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. It absolutely was my pleasure. And thank you, Deb, again, for pulling this together and these speakers together and just bringing a lot of light and joy into the world. We really need it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, friends, for joining us. This has been Loree Draude, call sign Rowdy, and she's done an amazing job. So look forward to sending that email to you so you'll be able to check out her book. And thank you so much for being a part of our Brilliance of Humanity Summit. Have a great day, friends.